Today we're going to talk about part 3 of Westward expansion. And this is the sad part about westward expansion. This is the effects that it had on the Native Americans. As you know, the Native Americans were here long before European settlers ever came into this land. And European settlers, or what we know now today as our first settlers, the colonists, actually have always kind of treated the Native Americans badly as far as land is concerned. And this is where the U.S. government actually, they had a treaty with the Native Americans to let them have land, and then they discovered gold on the land and they took the treaty back. So we'll talk about that in just a second. How did the lives of American Indians change with westward expansion? The impact on American Indians. Of course, American Indians were opposed to westward expansion. This had been their land for thousands of years, and now all of a sudden these people were coming in and telling them they had to get off their land. They were killing off the buffaloes, which were the Native Americans' food supply, and the Native Americans were being pushed further and further, and the more that they were being pushed off their land, the worse it was for them, because they didn't have food supplies, they didn't have adequate shelter, and a lot of the Native Americans were starving and dying. One of the big things was the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. The American Indians actually won this battle, but because of this battle, it was the last major battle that the Native Americans would win, and the U.S. government really sent in forces to pretty much wipe out the Native Americans after this and put what was left on reservations. The Battle of Little Bighorn started when Custer and his men went in to move Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse off of their land. They were Lakota Indians. They had owned this land. They had a treaty with the United States government. But some of the settlers that had moved into the area had found gold, and so the U.S. wanted the land back. So they sent in General Custer, George Armstrong Custer, to go in and move the Native Americans off the land. Chief Sitting Bull and Chief Crazy Horse said, nope, we're not moving, we're not going anywhere. The Native Americans all gathered around, and Custer had actually underestimated how many Native Americans there were. So when his troops went in, they were completely wiped out. And this is a good trivia question for you guys. I don't think there were but maybe one or two survivors, if any survivors of this. The Native Americans really went in, and of course they were protecting their land. They thought they were right. The U.S. Army and Custer thought they were right. So it was one of those situations where everybody thought they were right, but it ended up with all of these men dying, fighting to move the Native Americans off the land. After this, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, even though he did defeat General Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn, he pretty much knew that the U.S. would retaliate. So at the next battle that they had, the U.S. government did defeat them. The other Native American that fought and led raids in the southwest part of Texas was Geronimo. And Geronimo led his forces against settlements, against the cavalry officers, just trying to keep his land in the southeast. Chief Joseph was with the Nez Perce, and they also had land in the Black Hills of Montana, and his people had settled this land, and the government came in and said, you have to move. We want this land. You can't be here anymore. And Chief Joseph saw that his people were suffering, so he tried to move them into Canada. And the tribe was actually basically caught and then put on a reservation. And he made this wonderful speech. He said, hear me, my chiefs, I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more. And he basically said, we know that we can't defeat you because we don't have the people, the arms, and the ammunition. So we're giving up. And his reservation, his tribe was put on a reservation. The United States government also forced relocation from traditional lands to reservations, and they tried to reschool Native Americans and take away their identities. They wanted to make them more Americanized. And you got to remember, they were here before settlers were. They reduced the population through warfare and disease. The Battle of Wounded Knee was the retaliation of the massacre of 150 Sioux Indians following the death of Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull was killed, and they had the massacre. They had the Battle of Wounded Knee, where this was pretty much the end of the Sioux or Lakota Indians. The battle was the final armed conflict with the Native Americans. And again, the Native Americans never forget Wounded Knee. They tried to assimilate Native Americans through lifestyle changes. Assimilate means that you take something and try to make it into something else. And here's a good example. This is the Native American young man before, and when they sent him to school, this is what he looked like after. And you can kind of see he doesn't look real happy, does he? The other thing that they did, they reduced the buffalo population. Native Americans used buffalo as their meat source and their food source, and they used every part of the buffalo, and they thought it was against their beliefs to leave any of the buffalo left. They used every bit of it. When the settlers came in and the buffaloes were standing in the way of trains and progress, the train companies actually hired people to go in and just kill the buffalo. And that's what they did. They killed them, they got their hides, and they just left them there. And it was so sad because they wiped out pretty much a whole population of buffalo. And not only did they wipe out the buffalo, but they wiped out the food and the source for the Native Americans. Their reduced homelands through treaties, they already had land that was just specified for Native Americans, but when the treaties were broken, they even lost that land. They forced the removal of American Indians or Native Americans from their lands, and it continued through the remainder of the 19th century. The 19th century would have been the late 1800s, as settlers continued to move west following the Civil War. So the Native Americans were displaced. They were assimilated into schools, and their food source, the buffalo, was pretty much decimated. So it really did affect them more than we ever imagined. And you can kind of see, what's going on with them. It was just a bad time. This was a picture I wanted you to look at because I saw this and I thought that is really, if you think about it, I want you to think about this picture, and when we see each other again and we have a discussion, I want to see what you thought about it. You have a picture of Native Americans, and it says Homeland Security. And I don't know if you know or not, but we have Homeland Security in our country to keep us safe from terrorism, and it started after 9/11. And this one kind of hit home because it was Homeland Security fighting terrorism since 1492. And if you remember this date, 1492 was when Columbus came over and discovered America. And after he discovered America, that's when Europeans came in and started taking over pieces and portions of South America, North America, and Canada. And so if you I'm going to let you think about that and see what your take on this is. That's all I have on Westward expansion for right now. I hope you guys have a good week.